Hey, thank you for listening to another episode of the Business of Fun podcast. Today's episode is a replay of a LinkedIn Live that was hosted by my friend Bruce Eckfeldt that included me and William Lieberman, the managing partner at the CEO's right hand, where we talk about strategic use of key performance indicators, KPIs. As is often the case when I'm on these things, I tried to bring a little bit of a counterintuitive idea to these. I thought the conversation went pretty well, so I asked Bruce if he could share the audio file with me so I could post it here in the podcast feed. I think that understanding what you're measuring and why is very helpful. And I think that this conversation is going to be useful for you. Before I turn it over to me talking with Bruce and William, I want to remind you to check out the Talking Tickets newsletter. That's talkingtickets.substack.com. Visit my website, davewakeman.com. Rate and review the podcast and share this episode or any of the other episodes with somebody who you think will benefit from these conversations. Without anything further, here's this special conversation with me, William Lieberman, and Bruce Eckfeldt on the Business of Fun podcast.
Okay, welcome everyone. You're at the live stream here today. This is a roundtable discussion. We are going to cover everything related to strategic performance indicators, KPIs for scaling companies. I'm going to do a little overview. I'm going to introduce our guests, and then we're going to get into it. We're going to go about a half an hour here, so we're starting at about 1:15 Eastern time. We'll wrap up around 1:45 Eastern. So our topic today, this week's roundtable, we're going to explore key performance indicators, KPIs. We're going to talk about how they help guide leadership in terms of growth. We're going to talk about selecting KPIs, what are strategic KPIs, how do we use them to really drive performance, accountability. We're going to talk a little bit about best practice, tracking, adjusting KPIs as we go, some pitfalls that we all see in terms of companies, how they use or misuse KPIs in ways, and then really how do we use them to stay focused on success. So that's our topic. Let me introduce our guest today. First up, we have David Wakeman. David's a C-suite advisor focused on strategy, branding, and growth. He helps executives achieve significant profitability and business transformation through his experience in pricing strategy and effective solutions across various industries. Welcome, David. And next up, William Lieberman. William is managing partner of CEO's Right Hand, where he helps teams and businesses achieve strategic results, operational and financial growth. Over 20 years of experience in the space, and they specialize in delivering outsourced finance and HR services, helping companies scale successfully. Welcome, William.
Great to be here.
Finally, I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm an executive coach focused on helping CEOs and leadership teams scale and exit their businesses. I work with founders to help them really figure out strategic planning, growth, exiting, and sort of long-term success. I do a lot of work with teams and retreats, and excited for this. This is a topic that I get into a lot for the program. So welcome everyone, and welcome to our audience. If anyone has comments or questions they want to ask us, put it in the chat and we'll cover them as we go. I've got a whole bunch of questions that will take several hours if we went through them all, but we'll try to weave in anything that's coming with the audience as we go. So gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for being part of this today. Why don't we start with just, your framing of what KPIs are, like how do you kind of approach the subject of KPIs, and how they kind of drive or how they relate to the way in which you work with companies or the services that you provide companies. Dave, why don't we start with you and then we'll go to William. Give us a little insight. Like, how do you frame this topic?
Okay. Now, this is something that I spend a lot of time talking to people about because people are not hitting their KPIs when they call me. And what I've discovered over the years is that KPIs often mean something like metrics to people. Mm-hmm. And the starting point typically begins because they have not framed them very well, right? They just are easy stuff they can easily track. And so the jumping off point for me when I'm talking about KPIs is I go, well, what strategic decisions have you made? And why are you tracking these KPIs, because the most important thing is they're key. There shouldn't be a whole lot of them, because a lot of times you see people who they're tracking 10, 12 different things, and I go, what are you doing? You can really track 1 or 2, 3 key things, right? So the first jumping off point is like, well, how did you come to this decision? Are you using KPIs to mean metrics? And usually metrics mean things that you can easily track. And then we go and have conversations from there, because most of the time the KPI decision or a conversation starts out because of a lack of strategy. And so that usually is the door that I walk through. Yeah. Because I'm not hitting my KPIs, and that usually means I really haven't said anything that's worthwhile.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think what's really important from my perspective, just like what you're alluding to, Dave, is when I speak with the CEO, it's like, well, where do you want to be 3 years from now? So what's your strategic vision for the business? Mm-hmm. And then let's frame the guideposts, if you will, the KPIs, so that they align with where you want to get to. Right. So it's great to know, okay, well, how many deals did I close last month? If that's one, a KPI that is interesting, but does that really get you where you want to get to? Maybe, but maybe not. Right. And maybe it's the margin on those deals, or maybe it's, the type of revenue from those deals, whatever it might be, might be more important to where you're headed. If you're headed towards an exit, you're going to be looking for different KPIs than if you're really investing for growth.
Yeah.
Well, can I ask you something about this? Because I'm curious about this. Because so you talk about a 3-year time frame, and is that even relevant now? Because a lot of times I find that people are talking like 3 or 5 years, and I go, listen, man, we have to talk about like a year, right, at the most. Yeah. And then the other interesting thing is, I'm curious about your experiences, is you talk about like the context of those KPIs and how important they are. Because a lot of times what I tell people, I used to have this branding as the revenue architect, and I go, well, I don't like it, because revenue is an easy thing to goose. I can cheat and raise your revenue. What's most important, right? Profit matters a lot more than the revenue. All of these things. So I'm curious, like, when you make those comments and like those observations, Bill, like, is that 3 to 5 year time frame still relevant? And how do you have that context conversation?
Right. So for me, the reason I always start with where do you want to be 3 years from now is because then I work backwards. Okay, if you want to be here or there 3 years from now, what does that mean? Where do you need to be 1 year from now? Okay, well, where do you need to be 3 months from now? What do you need to do this month? So I always start with, where are we trying to get to? And then I work backwards from there to develop, the rocks, if you will, as to what do we need to achieve all along the way. And the KPIs are, give me the guideposts for how to get there. And so you're right. I'm not saying, okay, well, 3 years from now, we want to be at 20 million revenue. So this is the KPI for 3 years from now. It's okay. If you want to get to 20 million revenue in 3 years, what do we need to do a year from now? Right. What do we need to do next quarter?
Yeah. I'm curious how you, because I'm fully on board with the idea of KPIs need to be based on strategy, right? Like what are you trying to do? How are you going to win? And what are the things you're doing to win? And then how do we build KPIs around that? I guess, how frequently do you change or adjust or massage your either individual KPIs or the suite of KPIs that you're looking at inside of a business? Like, for you to, like, what's the rhythm, or what's the cycle for reviewing and revising KPIs?
Oh,
go for it.
Go first.
So for me, the way I like to think about it is at least annually. In my business, particularly in some of my clients' business, sometimes things change more quickly. I need to pivot a little bit along the way. So, for example, we introduced a new service a week and a half ago. So that new service is going to generate recurring revenue. So now recurring revenue becomes more important to me as a KPI for my business. And so it kind of depends on the velocity of your business, how much innovation you're having, how quickly you're growing. But in my opinion, at least once a year, you should be definitely reviewing what are they and what should they be on a go forward basis, almost like as part of your annual budget cycle.
Mm-hmm. Dave, what are your thoughts?
Like Bill was saying earlier with the context matters.
Yeah.
Right. Because, and I'll use an example that I can easily use here because it's a nonprofit thing that I'm involved in, and I'm on the board, and so that's part of the deal is I can use these examples when I do talks and stuff.
I love it.
Is we do it on a program by program basis, right? And so that's like by the launch, by the signups, sometimes it's seasonal, so that context really matters. And the way I try to get people to think about strategy is the starting point is always what does success look like, right? So when you get to what you dub success, how will I know it if I was like not involved in this process at all, right? I want to make it so it's blatantly obvious because most of the time, the failure to explain what success and what the goals look like is a leading cause of fuzzy or just useless KPIs. So I start there, and that usually helps me understand how often. I mean, I would never go more than a year without looking at them, but I find that a lot of times there's like a lot of, depending on what the nature of them is, there's a lot more opportunities to look at if you're on track or if you're not on track. And I think that's just as much as KPIs, it's just really like never setting yourself on autopilot when you're thinking about your strategy and the direction of your business.
Yeah,
you definitely want to.
The question though.
Yeah, you definitely want to look at them monthly, right? As once you set them, you want to measure monthly. But in terms of creating new ones or adjusting or changing, that's where I was headed on the sort of annual review.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you, William, on that whole. It depends on somewhat the rate of change in the business and the industry. I generally work with my clients. We do a 12-quarter plan, or so a 3-year plan, and then we're meeting quarterly to basically update that and revise it and set 90-day goals. And oftentimes we end up with these two buckets. Like we've got our KPIs, which are associated with our 3-year plan, which are the key kind of the differentiators that we're trying to put into the market, the measurable objectives that we're trying to achieve long term. And then every quarter we've got a set, usually 3 to 5, that we're measuring for that quarter based on the particular objectives that we're trying to put in place in that 90-day period. So we end up with these kind of this two-part dashboard, the long-term KPIs, which we're constantly monitoring, and then the quarterly ones, which are based on what we're trying to achieve, the priorities or rocks we're trying to achieve in the quarter. Let me ask a little bit about types of KPIs, because I think this is where I see a lot of teams get caught up. They put things like revenue on there as a KPI, and I always find that like, okay, by the time you're looking at revenue, everything's too late, right? Like you're noticing the cow that's out in the pasture, and you're like, oh, how do we keep the cow in the barn? It's like we're way beyond that point. How do you kind of categorize KPIs in terms of these kind of end result KPIs versus early stage KPIs? Is there any insight or structure that you use to help, create KPIs of different types? I don't want to be too leading on this, but what are the different types of KPIs that you have?
To me, that's an easy question because I was actually going to be like, let me ask you guys about this because what I really try to do is try to get a mix of tangible and intangible metrics of success. Okay. And the tangible ones are easy, right? Those are the things you can measure, right? Yeah. And it could be, some of the ones I've used lately, right, is like, let's track how long it takes you to make a sale, which is like the number of touch points that your sales team, has to take to make a sale. The intangible one that would support that though is like, how long and how consistent is your branding? What are some of the things that people are saying, those brand associations, right? Are those brand associations where you need them to be? Because that will either raise or lower the number of touch points that a salesperson might have to make. Other kind of intangible things is, maybe if you're dealing with a startup, right? Mm-hmm. The founder, CEO, the board could be stressed out by the whole thing because, and it could be for any number of reasons. It could be the number of like just stupid meetings they're taking because there's a lot of infighting or there's a lot of, friction between contractors or partners or whomever, mm-hmm. right? And so one of the intangible things is your stress level going down. Can't necessarily measure it like a tangible thing, but you can say, oh yeah, I'm like way stressed. So I try to mix those tangible and intangible ones because sometimes the intangibles are really powerful and help you make progress. Because if you're, using the example I just used, if you're super stressed out, you don't really have the mental space to be strategic, to make decisions that are going to guide your business towards growth.
Yeah. William, how do you kind of structure or categorize your KPIs?
Yeah, I think about it, so I'm a finance guy by background. So I always have my finance KPIs, which are revenue growth. Now, not revenue as an absolute number, but revenue growth as an example, or gross margin as a percentage of revenue, operating margin as a percentage of revenue. Those are the types of things. And then you get into things like profit growth. So you're trying to look at rates of change because you want to see if something's trending down and you want to catch it in time where you can make a difference, for the rest of your fiscal year or on a go forward basis. So you want to be able to measure and manipulate and figure out, well, what do I do with this if I see it under my target? So here's where I want to be. Here's my target sort of goal for this KPI, and here's where I am month by month. And if I see it trending downwards, let's do something about it. If I see it trending up, great. So I have those financial metrics, but then I have operational metrics like Dave's kind of mentioning on, number of closed deals, or it could be net retention. It could be, how many leads came into our marketing engine, whatever it might be, that helps drive, again, the goals for the year for the team. And what I like to think about is, okay, so here are my corporate goals, corporate KPIs, and then departmentally, kind of like what you're saying, Bruce, here's some more sort of tactical ones for each department. So like, do I really care how many sales leads I got this month at a corporate level? No, but am I going to bonus my sales team based upon their sales leads? Absolutely. So those are the KPIs might be at the departmental level, very granular or much more tactical in nature, but they still fit in with the context of the whole strategy. So those are the types of things that I think about.
Yeah. One thing that I've done, I started this maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and it's been very interesting and it's been helpful in many respects, is I kind of think of the business like an engine, and we'll create KPIs that are kind of input KPIs, right? So things that I do, activity based, and then kind of process KPIs, like KPIs that tell me how well the engine is running, like what's my fuel mixture, right? Like, things that are insightful in terms of what's happening inside the box. And then these output KPIs, which, are, revenue and stuff like that. And by categorizing that way, it kind of helps us understand how we're going to use the KPI, because in activity one, we can actually look on a weekly basis. It's like, okay, well, number of calls that we've had or number of outbounds, right? Like I can say, well, we said we're going to do 30 a week. We only did 20 this week. Like what happened, right? There's some activity-based issue going on versus, well, I did my 30, but usually we're converting 22% of those into a call. And this last week, it was 5. It's like, what happened, right? Like we did the activity, something happened inside the engine that didn't convert it. And then we can look at the output. We can say, well, we did the 30 calls, we had a 22 conversion, but normally that generates at least, $30,000 in revenue. It only generated 15. So it helps. What I find is it helps the team kind of figure out, well, what is the action or question or insight that I need to start looking at once I have them? Because it's like I said, like revenue, like if we're looking at revenue, like, oh, like that was a mistake we made 3 months ago because we didn't do our calls. Like now we know that for the next 3 months we're screwed because we can't go back in time.
I think the way I think about it is leading indicators versus lagging, right? So a leading indicator would be, in my world, it would be weighted average sales pipeline value, right? It's a leading indicator as to, well, what will my revenues be? So if I don't have a pipeline to support revenues 3, 6, 9 months from now, then something's wrong and I got to fix it. And I have time before I get there, before my revenues aren't, where I need them to be. And that's a leading indicator. And that's really important.
Yeah. Dave, you were going to say something?
Well, yeah, I was going to ask you both, like, how much of a lag do you see, right? So it's easy to look at the external, the outcome-based KPIs and judge those. It's sometimes hard to connect them with the process-based KPIs, and this is a challenge I deal with sometimes because people want they want an instant, change in status, like an instant change in him. You know, and most of the time I tell people, like, look, in 90 days, we will have seen some kind of change, you know, but what's the relationship, I guess is the question I'm asking, you know, between the stuff you're measuring and watching going in and when you'll see the results coming out. Because I mean, I just know from from the people I work with, when it's about fixing that strategy and brand pricing piece, right? Yeah. That in 90 days I can do some stuff, right? And we can like see a significant change, right? Where we know we're heading or not heading in the right direction. But what about you guys? Because you work with different, you know, in different areas in different ways.
Yeah. I'm gonna say one of the reasons I loved, I worked with several different SaaS companies, and they were so good about doing cohort analysis, right? They could say, well, we know that the activity we're doing with this group, this new cohort of leads, right? We know it takes 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks to go, and they can actually segment out all the data, and they can say, okay, well, this is how we did this cohort, and this is the result, and then this is how we did the next cohort and result. Because otherwise, you start looking at results across cohorts. It's like, well, my results now could be a mix of the people we talked to 6 months ago that we used a certain process in that takes 6 months. And then we did a different technique that it was a 4-week process. The results land on the same time, but they were the result of vastly different strategies. And so this idea of being able to kind of segment out your, whatever part of the process you're talking about into these kind of cohorts and understand what is the conversion rate and time frame for each of those. And then we can start playing both with conversion rates and time frames. We can say, well, look, this group, it took us 12 weeks because we used this strategy. And this one, it only took 6 because we changed up. We did a demo meeting early, or we, got pricing up front earlier, because that was, it turns out we were taking 6 weeks to negotiate pricing. And if we just get it up front and we just weed out the people that, that's going to be a problem, right? Like, so changing those strategies, but you have to have a certain amount of discipline and logic of layering those things out so you can actually do that analysis. And it's hard for most companies.
And look, it also depends on what you're selling, right? If you're a manufacturer of nuclear reactors, it's a lot different than, a $5,000 piece of software. Yeah. So it really depends on the sales cycle, the manufacturing cycle, the delivery cycle, et cetera, as to the length of time that you have to affect change in the coming period, whatever period that is.
Yeah. How many, we've talked a little bit about, you can create lots of KPIs. I think someone mentioned earlier, like, it's easy. You could, get in GPT and you can create 150 KPIs pretty quickly. How do you kind of choose the KPIs, and what's a number? Is there a sweet spot that you've seen in terms of enough to get insights, but not so much that you're just overwhelmed with data? Is there any heuristics that you have around that?
So for me, at the corporate level, I want to be about 5, right? Yeah. At the departmental level, it could be 10, ish, give or take. But at the corporate level, about 5.
Yeah.
That's pretty close. I usually say 3 to 5. Okay. And honestly, and like most of the time, I attach those to goals. Which, and usually, you can really only achieve 1 or 2 big goals if they're like really, really aggressive things you're doing as an organization. So I want to make sure everything's lined up, because one of the challenges is really, like, you just try to have, like you said, I can come up with 150 KPIs. Yeah. What's 3 things that are really going to move you forward, right? And and if I can get people focusing on that, then I feel like I've done a pretty good job, and usually it leads the numbers in the right direction.
Yeah. I've kind of used this heuristic from organizational dynamics of 7 plus or minus 2, right, as being kind of the number of things, number of relationships, people, things that people can keep track of. It's the phone number logic, right? It's like it's like your working memory. I can kind of keep that number, and like more than that, and I just lose it. But it's enough that I can get a fairly high resolution model of what's going on.
When you get to 7 or 9, right? Like, plus or minus, because at 5 is where we are. Do you find that people can still do something with that? Because I'm curious about that, because I find really, like, if I'm getting to the 5 that William says is the top of his, I am really stretching the limits of what I see people can really, really do. And I find that it's always better to cut back than it is to add.
I would agree. I do think I've seen a couple of cases where the problem or the thing we're trying to understand is complicated enough where a couple of these extra KPIs can often throw in some, oh, everything that's good with the core 5, but then all of a sudden you're like, well, wait a minute, like this one over here has gone sideways. Like what's going on with that? So for me, it's about, creating enough kind of views of the problem. And, it's not necessarily that they're going to keep all the metrics in place all the time. It's like we can kind of catch things. Like we can notice a trend or a change or a gap, and it helps us triangulate the problem a little bit. So I tend to go with the 7 ± 2 as being kind of my ballpark, and then sort of seeing where the team wants to go. There's another one in there I wanted to dig in on, which is I think someone mentioned something about sales and revenue. It's I always joke, if you want me to double your sales close rate, that's fine. I'm just going to cut your prices by 20%, right? Like, and I can, easy, done, right? How do you kind of manage this kind of gaming or this kind of, if you're too focused on one KPI, like you can totally skew the business if you're not, kind of watching the other aspects of it. And like, how do you approach that? Like if we're too focused on one number, like we can really kind of throw the business off, or we can game the system to hit that number, but then really not get the results ultimately we want. Strategies on that?
All right. So number one, just for everybody listening, price is a terrible way to stimulate demand.
Yes.
Number one, full stop. Number two, I have had a pretty strong history of like doubling people's revenue in 90 days. Like I've done it many times. Mm-hmm. And the key to it, most of the time I can almost tell you when it's going to happen, is that people aren't tracking much of anything, or what they're doing is they're tracking stuff that's useless. So if you just start tracking things in 90 days, you can usually see a significant boost, right? So the key thing is like, are you going to focus on the right numbers or the wrong numbers? Because it's easy to mess with the revenue and make you look good, right? There's no real skill in driving the revenue number if you already are in a somewhat established business, because you can cheat, right? I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can cheat. The key is always understanding the answer to the first question, which is what does success look like? Because that should help you understand what should I really be tracking. If you're early as a startup, maybe revenue is not the thing you want to track. I would argue that revenue is probably the most important thing to track, or profit, because the thing is like you can have the greatest idea in the world, but if you're selling it at 50% what it really costs you to make, then there's no skill in that, right? So you want to make sure that any numbers you're tracking are based on your strategy. And again, you have to make clear strategic decisions, because most of the problems that we encounter, especially around like what we're tracking and challenges with KPIs, the foundation is a lack of strategy.
Yeah. William, your thoughts?
I think it's important also to align your team with what your goals are. So if you are compensating your sales team for generating revenue, like you said, they're going to cut prices and just sell a bunch of stuff. But if you compensate them for the gross margin, or maybe even you give them profit sharing, they're going to be thinking more bottom line. And if you really want to grow the value of your firm, you want to have your people aligned to grow the bottom line.
Yeah.
You will find salespeople become incredible at selling based on value as soon as you reward them for profit.
Yeah.
And if they are rewarded for driving revenue, it's always the price is too high. The price is always too high, and I need the marketing team to create some more collateral for me. Those are two guarantees.
Or I don't have enough stuff to sell. Give me more products or services to sell.
Oh, yeah, that's right. William coming in with the third one. That's right. Those are the three. Right? Yeah. The price is too high. I need more collateral. Give me a new product to sell. Yeah, well, those are 100%.
Yeah. So one last
anywhere
question
else where that wasn't the case.
Yeah, exactly. One last question. I wanted to just kind of get your take on. So, and I think Dave, you may have mentioned this before. There's a lot of things we'd love to be able to measure, but it's really tough, and a lot of them are either subjective or they're just really difficult to kind of get to. Like, are there any strategies or techniques that you've used to try to measure some of these intangibles or some of these things that are tough to measure really directly?
Yeah, I do spend a lot of time with people on this because it is hard. You forget, like, things are going better or things have gotten worse, and you forget where you've come from.
Yeah.
So I like to make people, lay out, really just like make a note in their notebook or, in a file on their computer about what the change would look like. If it's an intangible item, right? How would you describe being less stressed? If we fix something,
Mm-hmm.
and then they jot down 3 or 4 notes about what that would look like. So then, 30 days down the road, 45 days, once we've made like some kind of intervention, you can go, oh, this is like at the time I was having this, and this going on. And now, like, I definitely spend less time on this. So, okay, so great. So let me continue to double down on this. So I try to get people to reflect on where they are and what the change would look like, so that they have a frame for it. Because a lot of times we get busy, we forget, how bad things were or what caused us to take action. So I just make people take notes of it.
Yeah. Yeah. William, any insights?
I wish it was more complicated, but this is really.
I think, I agree. I just translate that into numbers because I'm a numbers guy.
Yeah.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy am I this month, this quarter, right? And then I track that, right? As an example for using Dave's example. It's like employee satisfaction survey or client satisfaction survey type NPS scoring and things like that. Those are the types of metrics that you can track over time that you can quantify, but it's still an intangible in terms of like satisfaction. That's kind of an intangible.
Yeah.
But that's something I do.
Yeah. Similar. I'm a big fan of NPS and eNPS, both for customers and employees. I've seen some really interesting tools starting to come out where they're tracking data, things like email sentiments and stuff like that, where they're using corporate data to create baselines and then measure changes in some of these variables. And the reason I really like those is because NPS at least objectifies some of these sentiment things, but it's still respondents, right? Like someone has to like, oh, I'm a 7, I'm an 8. And I don't know, like I woke, I got cut off in traffic that morning. I'm a little pissy, right? I may be a little off. Whereas some of this database stuff where they're kind of mining the corporate data to create some insights seems a little bit more stable and a little bit more independent or less prone to user kind of situational kind of thing. So I'm fascinated as some of these tools comes out and the things that we can start tracking that are more kind of sentiment and more subjective based metrics on the company. It's a little scary too in terms of what people know about people, but it's interesting to see where this is going. So we're going to be at time here. That's our 30 minutes. I want to give our guests here a chance to kind of give some information. If people want to get more information about you, about the work that you do, what's the best way to get that? Let's start with William and then we'll go to Dave.
So the CEO's right hand, our website is tcrh.co, and you can get me, William, at tcrh.co, and I'll answer any questions you have.
Awesome. Thank you. Dave.
I will send people to my website. It is my name, Dave Wakeman, davewakeman.com. So you can email me, dave@davewakeman.com. There's newsletters, there's a podcast, there's all kinds of stuff, so please send me your questions and your ideas. And thank you for paying attention.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. And my website, eckfeldt.com, has all the what I do as a coach. It has a bunch of the podcasts that I work on. Also, my LinkedIn profile has a lot of information. I produce a lot of content there. I encourage everyone to reach out to all of us if you have questions or want to continue this conversation. I want to thank our guests, William and David. Thank you so much for being here today. Great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks, Bruce.
Let me know what you thought of the conversation that you just listened to between me, Bruce Eckfeldt, and William Lieberman by sending me an email. My name, Dave, at davewakeman.com. You can visit me at my website. It's davewakeman.com. Check out the Talking Tickets newsletter. There's a pop-up box on davewakeman.com that will enable you to sign up for the newsletter, or you can go to talkingtickets.substack.com and find out what the Talking Tickets newsletter is, which is, spoiler alert, about tickets and how to sell more of them. And you can sign up there. Do me a favor. You're 35 minutes into this special episode of the Business of Fun. I know you dig it. Rate the podcast, review it on your favorite podcast platform, and do me a favor and share it with a colleague or a friend or someone who would benefit from a conversation like this. Also, let me know who you'd like to hear from. That helps as well. But thank you so much for listening. Until next time, I will talk to you soon. Take it easy.